In the year 1162, on the windy steppes of ancient Mongolia, a child is born. The child grows up in poverty, hunting and foraging for sustenance across an unforgiving terrain. He learns the ways of the land, learns the ways of the sword. It's a cruel, desperate way of living that pits brother against brother, that shackles men to the yoke. And over time, like water over rock, the man forms a vision. It's a vision of a world not at war with itself, not laid low by strife and turmoil, but united under one banner, under the same eternal blue sky. The man would begin with a small tribe scattered throughout the land, gathering them together under his dominion, cruel but fair and equal measure. From there, his kingdom would sweep across the continent, an expansion marked not just by ruthless conquest, but by innovation and cooperation, fostering great advances in art, communication, and trade. By the time the man's reign was finally ended, he had forged one of the largest empires in history, and his name would echo forevermore throughout the ages. The man's name was Temujin, but the world would come to know him as Genghis Khan. I like John Wayne. I like him in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. I like him in True Grit, Rio Bravo, McClintock. He's almost a genre unto himself, this kind of broad, loud-mouthed American assuredness. That said, outside of a few exceptions, John Wayne never seemed to have too much range as an actor. When you tune into a John Wayne film, you're not tuning in so much to watch a man disappear into his role so much as you are to watch John Wayne be John Wayne. In the 1940 film, The Long Voyage Home, Wayne plays a Swedish gentleman named Ole Olsen, and I swear I thought he was supposed to have some sort of head injury for most of the running time.
I leave home when I was kid. Now I don't leave no more. I got all the sea I want for my whole life.
So John Wayne, while still a one-of-a-kind screen presence, was always at his best within a very particular set of limitations, namely cowboys or army guys. Never was this more apparent than in 1956, when he took on the role of Genghis Khan.
Spirits of heaven, yes, a guy, my father, do not desert me in this fateful hour. Let not treachery prevail.
Race. Everybody's got one. Everybody's talking about it. But what is it? And how does it play out on film? How much does the context of one's race change depending on what part of the world they're in? How is race observed by someone uninitiated to the specifics of a certain geographic region? In the Amazon Studios Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Playbook, released in 2021, you can find requirements such as the following. Most productions should ideally include a minimum of 30% women and 30% members of an unrepresented racial or ethnic group. The aspirational goal will rise to 50% in 2024. Aim to include one character from each of the following categories in speaking roles, with minimum 50% of these to be women: LGBTQIA+, person with a disability, and 3 regionally underrepresented race, ethnic, cultural groups, which can be represented by a single character. And to the point at hand, there's this one. Cast actors whose identity, gender identity, nationality, race or ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability, aligns with the character. Christ on a crutch, this gibberish is hard to read. This last mandate, insofar as race is concerned, might at least be of some artistic service. Generally, it makes sense. An actor of one particular race or nationality playing a character of the same should lend a greater sense of authenticity. They would best look the part, and they might bring to bear a certain experience or knowledge of the language and customs. On the other hand, it is all just acting, isn't it? And what does authenticity mean exactly, when really the only thing that matters is what comes across on screen? There have been actors who have played into a certain racial ambiguity and no one has made a stink about it. Cher isn't really Italian. Oscar Isaac and Alfred Molina have both made careers playing multiple ethnicities. Might we then conceive of a world in which, divorced of all moral implications, John Wayne, as an appropriately talented actor, covered in state-of-the-art makeup and backed by the best costumes and sets, could make for a convincing enough Genghis Khan? The question then isn't so much, is this authentic, but how authentic is this? A viewer's tolerance for the inauthentic, what might ruin their immersion in a piece of art, might be determined by a number of factors. Their understanding of history, their understanding of a possible source material. It might be determined by the artistic and social norms of their culture, or by peer pressure even. Modern Hollywood, for instance, seems to take an erratic, situational approach to authenticity. Ancient China or a fantastical African country, those will naturally cohere to a very specific demographic reality. Ancient Norway or a medieval England, on the other hand, those seem to be ripe for reinterpretation. In the case of The Conqueror, the film's problems extend beyond the obvious major discrepancies between the race of the actors and their real-life counterparts and into an almost complete disregard for any sort of historical authenticity. The broad strokes are there. The Mongols in this film ride horses, they live in yurts, and they carry falcons, but it's slathered all over with this generically sweeping, Hays Code-abiding sentimentality. It's a tone that works for any other movie of its time, for any other John Wayne Western, but here the effect is to render the film historically and culturally inert. This could be about any group of people, at any point in time. Ancient Mongolia abstracted into some nebulous American fantasy. There's a scene where Temujin orders a pair of men to be hung, just like they would in a western frontier town. The only problem is they're on the Mongolian steppes, where there's clearly no trees around. There's no trees, and these are nomadic people who probably didn't go around packing and unpacking a gallows. It was as if any other method of execution. For instance, there are accounts of ancient Mongolians wrapping their enemies up in carpets and trampling them to death with horses, was either too gruesome or too incongruent with the American frontier mythos. And that's sort of what the entire film is like something out of the imagination of a child of the 1950s, more than any adult. It's cowboys and Indians abstracted to Mongols and Turks. The music, for instance, seems to be a complete invention, a blending of vaguely Slavic and Arabic tones that, while sure is in the ballpark geographically, sounds nothing like traditional Mongolian folk music. The costumes and the sets play as a kind of generic technicolor lavishness. None of it feels real, none of it lived in. The story of Genghis Khan isn't just the story of one man, but the story of a people. The movie tells us through dialogue that the Mongols are nomads, but we never see them actually move around until the closing shot of the film. We never see the reason for their migration, or what hardships such a life might entail. We're shown the Mongols have horses, but never how essential they are to their way of life or their expansion. We never see the Mongols putting raw meat under their saddles. We never hear the stories of them nicking their horses to drink the blood on long winter travels, slurping from them like great hooved bags of Capri Sun. I understand this is maybe a lot to expect of a movie from 1956, but even a little bit more attention to detail might have gone a long way to ameliorate the first, biggest, and most obvious stumbling block of the film. The fact that everyone in ancient Mongolia looks a little, off. Everyone looks goofy in their bronzed skin and Fu Manchu mustaches. John Wayne speaks like a caveman beat poet.
You return empty-handed from the chase, my son?
Not so, fine gazelle.
No individual, except for maybe the shaman character, quite approaches the in-your-face outlandishness of Mickey Rooney in Breakfast at Tiffany's, but the conglomerate effect of almost every main and background character being anything but Asian or Turkish in appearance makes the whole occasion jarring one minute, hysterical the next. There are some hackneyed attempts at exotifying the cast in the likes of Pedro Amendoiz, who is of Mexican descent, or Peter Mamakos, who is of Greek. Many of the background characters are apparently Navajo, which is close enough. I won't say the entire film is inept. There's some great scenery and sets. There's an impressive battle on horseback towards the end. But on the whole, whatever value there is to be gleaned from the film, for anyone with a basic knowledge of history, is going to be largely comedic. It's the sort of film activists might point to as proof that initiatives like the ones put forth by Amazon and other studios are necessary, that we need more, and yet, if The Conqueror really is the symptom of some grave and ongoing social ill, I'm not sure the same institutions that created the problem in the first place are the right ones to then try and solve it by decree. I'm not sure the masterminds behind The Conqueror, or something like, say, The Woman King or Vikings Valhalla, are really too far apart in their thinking. Neither seem as concerned with cultural or historical authenticity so much as conforming it to the moral and political preoccupations of the time. In 1956, during the Cold War, and not so long after World War II, that preoccupation might have been with the preserving and advancing of Western American hegemony, one of the side effects being a tendency towards ethnic paranoia. In 2022, during Twitter, the preoccupation seems to be a hierarchical restructuring based on the presumed advantages of one demographic over another, tending towards ethnic paranoia. The players might have changed, but the game remains the same. It all blows downwind from the same anxieties, the same Hollywood myth-making. Speaking of blowing downwind, what would a video about The Conqueror be if we didn't talk a bit about nuclear fallout? Many of the exteriors for the Conqueror were shot not in Mongolia, but in the Escalante Desert near St. George, Utah, which just so happened to be 137 miles downwind from a nuclear testing site. Allegedly, the Atomic Energy Commission told producer Howard Hughes, "Hey, it'll be fine. And who are any of us to argue with the federal government?" The whole thing was so fine and so on the level that later Howard Hughes had 60 tons of that same dirt shipped from the Utah location back to Culver City, California, so that the studio reshoots could more realistically match the terrain. And hey, it really does look good. Those sets look great. The only problem is that all that dirt and the desert location was probably, allegedly, deathly radioactive. Of the 220 cast and crew, 91 of them later developed some form of cancer, 46 of them dying from it. Director Dick Powell died of cancer in 1963, Agnes Moorehead of uterine cancer in 1974, John Wayne of stomach cancer in 79. Pedro Armendariz was diagnosed with kidney cancer and later committed suicide once he learned it'd become terminal. Lee Van Cleef died of heart disease, with throat cancer marked as a secondary cause of death. Howard Hughes, while spared cancer himself, apparently became so racked with guilt that he spent $12 million buying every print of the film he could and was said to have watched it over and over again in the years leading up to his death. Here in the making of The Conqueror, in the tragedy that befell the cast and crew, there might be found something to satisfy the bloodthirsty, to satisfy those who would claim to want necessary historical redress. Here we might find some sense of irony. John Wayne betrayed and made sick by the very same military-industrial complex he championed throughout his career. The very frontier myth-making Wayne and company sought to weave throughout The Conqueror, showing its backside in a negligent Atomic Energy Commission. Maybe the overwhelming artistic and real-world disaster that is The Conqueror is in fact the long arm of the great Khan himself, reaching through the ages for one final conquest of an American film crew. Maybe somewhere, John Wayne has joined the real-life Temujin off in that eternal blue sky, where they might ride together across the windy steppes, ride across the American frontier, to a new world of peace, understanding, and all-around better judgment.